On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
All across North America, nay, the world, Jewish events are taking a turn for the hip. This, of course, is nothing new. People have been doing this since Sinai. But is Judaism actually in need of a rebrand? Stick around to hear about that, plus news, Torah, and so much more. From the CJN Podcast Network, I'm Avi Finegold, born and bred in Montreal and now in the remote wilds outside of Chicago, and along with Torontonian transplant Yedida Eisenstat, associate editor at the Posen Library of Jewish Culture and Civilization, and Matthew Leibl, a rabbi living in Winnipeg, we are not in heaven. Matthew, Mazel Tov. The Jets.
That's big.
The Jets. Does Adam Lowry get extra kiddush this week?
It can't hurt. People who don't believe in miracles should have been watching that hockey game the other night. In all seriousness, I will tell you that as somebody who has lived most of my life in Winnipeg, I lived in Halifax for a few years when I was in journalism school. And it's not just because I worked for TSN for a few years and I'm a huge sports fan. That game and the way that game ended the other night on Sunday night, I think changed our town. It changed our town from an inferiority complex town who feels like we will lose even when we win the President's Trophy to just believing that we could win the Stanley Cup. And it happened in a span of seconds. And it was the single greatest sporting event in the history of our town. And even though only 15,000 people were there, somehow 600,000 people will tell you they went to that game. Just tells you like everyone is still flying high a couple days later as we tape this on Tuesday. It was amazing.
Yeah, I see this as the equivalent of Habemus Papam.
Habemus Papam. Habemus Papam.
Habemus Papam.
What does Habemus Papam mean? It's Latin for "we have a pope," spoken from the balcony of St. Peter's when a new pope is elected. Stay curious, Factonauts out.
That all these people were locked into a room and waiting and hoping that this was going to work, and it did, and cheers erupt, and everything is great.
Yes, it's. I appreciate starting off our show with a nod to the Jets. It's maybe the next time we talk about it will be even bigger stakes, but this is a lot of fun. So yeah, thanks for the good wishes, Avi.
Speaking of conclaves, though, I hear that you have an opinion about kippas, and I really want to hear it.
Well, you know, they're picking a new pope, and there's all these articles and pictures of all these cardinals, and they're all wearing kippot. And, you know, it's fueled a few different discussions about kippas, even amongst our kind of group getting ready for our next show. And I just throw this out there. I don't like the kippah. I've never liked the kippah. And when I found out that the kippah was not like the talis, the tefillin, I was just like, why do we do this? What this whole business of, well, we've done it for so long, so it's been like a law. Oh my goodness. I don't like that stuff either. Maybe it's the trauma of being in elementary school and having to go to the office for those black felt kippot whenever I didn't have one on my head. And then they would hold my report card until I paid my $2.50 fine at the end of the, maybe it's that trauma. But
I think there's trauma there. I think there's repressed
I guess so, but I don't know. Like Avi, I mean, I'm fascinated by hair, and I don't ever like to disparage because I know that maybe the kippah is helpful if you don't have a lot of hair. But I've got good hair, and thank God. And to me, the kippah, like if it's a windy day, I have to put the clips. It's flying around. It's just I don't need the kippah for the purpose that they told me that it's for, which is, I think, a God thing. But I don't know. Yeah, Moses didn't have a kippah in the Torah. Come on.
He had a shtreimel. If you look at all the picture books in the
desert
bookstores.
I was going to say he had horns.
In the desert? Come on. Egypt heat, the first thing to go would have been the hats.
You know, I actually had a day where I hung out, quote unquote, with the Cardinal of Quebec, Charles Cyprien Lacroix, and he's now going to be off to Rome to be part of the conclave. And we were sharing ideas about the kippah because he was wearing his kippah, and he goes, every time somebody asks me about it, I say it's like God from above cupping his hand on my head and saying, "Oh, I'm protecting you," and I was like, "Oh, that's kind of sweet." But
it is very sweet. I don't want to say the wrong thing now. So what am I supposed to? I still don't like it.
Yeah.
That's good for him. That works for the cardinal. I mean, for sure.
I want to stick on the topic of fashion, but I'm not going to ask you about Kippas, Yedida, because I have a feeling that you either have very, very strong opinions or are completely like bereft of opinions about the kippah. But I do want to ask you, did you watch the Met Gala last night, aka the Rosh Hashanah of fashion?
Have you ever watched this? I have not.
Or seen the looks and decide like, oh yeah, that one, I can pull that off? Or
that is usually not my response. My response is not, oh, I could pull that off. When there's like, a modest dress that covers all the parts that I would normally cover, I'd be like, oh, I wonder if there's a copy of that coming. But mostly I watch for the totally crazy looks, the political looks, and there's I think it's a Twitter account maybe that has like a Jewish commentary, like that dress is made from my mother-in-law's tablecloth.
Yeah, so I was watching it last night, and that was exactly the feeling that I was like getting out of it. Was like, oh, I'm at the entryway to like the most outlandish Jewish wedding possible, and there's like relatives that are completely unreligious, and there's Hasidic relatives, and there's like a little bit of everybody, and you can tell exactly who this person is in the Jewish community, including like one of the guys who had a hat, and it clearly looked like he stole it off somebody's mother-in-law. It had this vibe because it was all elegant, all like really done to the nines. And you go to non-religious or non-Jewish weddings and nobody's dressed up anymore. And the only place you see people dressed for like gala events are religious weddings, I think, or like traditionally Jewish weddings. So yeah, that was a bit of a vibe that I was like going through last night as I was watching it. And yes, the same idea with my kids who were like, you'd scroll through a picture and they'd be like, oh, that picture's awesome. That dress is awesome. And they realized that it was like, there was no bottom, like they were not wearing pants and they were
see-through or yeah.
When I go to weddings now, or when I go to a bar mitzvah or something,
you don't wear pants?
The kids aren't wearing dress shoes. They're all wearing sneakers. They're wearing like these 13-year-old boys are wearing suits and they're wearing sneakers. Everything has changed. I have become that old man on my lawn screaming and wishing for old days.
Yes, you do that. Let's move to a nice story about the March of the Living. We gotta recover here.
No kidding.
Excellent. Let's move to a story that came out a couple days ago about the March of the Living participants from Canada who were at Ben Gurion when a Houthi rocket was launched at Ben Gurion and landed not far from there, rattling everybody, but not really causing any lasting damage. It really got me thinking, have you guys ever been on March of the Living?
I never did it. I had a number of students over the years, including just a couple of years ago where the delegation from Winnipeg, the survivor they were with passed away while they were there. It was like so that was very lasting just recently.
I also did not do it. One of my best friends in high school went when we were in 11th grade.
What do you guys make of the march? Do you see the people that have been moved by it remain moved over the course of like the next few decades? They're always thinking about that, or is it just like birthright, but we started in Poland?
I think it's hard to say because it's a self-selecting group of kids and families who like want to go on it and also have the means to make it happen. But I imagine it's a pretty life-changing experience that becomes like a prism through which a lot of the rest of their life is informed. And I think it's designed to be that impactful.
I mean, what could compare to walking through the camps, to doing the walk at Auschwitz, and then on the same trip being in Israel, and not just being in Israel at any time, but being in Israel on Yom HaAtzmaut? I just feel like the design of the program is very strong and I think very appealing because it's not just going to Europe. Like I think sometimes I would forget it when I was young. I would think it's just going to the camps, but no, it's got the Israel component. I think the two things together make for a very, especially now when there are so few survivors left, a very, very important. I think, the question of whether or not there's too much trauma that you see on a trip like this, particularly in a year like this one where there's the extra element of the post-October 7th added to it. I'm not positive, but I'm pretty sure the reason why the March of the Living didn't register for me as something to do when I was young was that I was afraid of the trauma. And I think there's also some real validity to the fact that you're going to see some things here that not everybody can handle, or not everybody, like if you're 16 years old and you see some of this stuff, even if you've learned about it in school, but if you haven't, I don't know how it's going to hit you. I'm sure it hits so many people in a different way. And I imagine that there is got to be a lot of trauma for people that they would see, and that there maybe is a certain argument for it not being for everybody, at least at that age. You maybe need to be old enough to go.
I also kind of controversial angle. Like we can be precious about trauma as much as we want. Like people lived this in real, and 16-year-olds lived through the camps and survived. And like, I'm not saying that we should like put our children through that, because we definitely like shouldn't put them through the real thing, but going and seeing and knowing that Israel is waiting for them on the other side. Like, let's just recognize that's the kind of memory engineering that we were talking about last week a little bit, but also they are safe, right? They're with a bunch of Jewish groups. It's not like they tried to kill us, we won, let's eat, because I don't think that that's the angle at all. But I think that the entire like constellation of October 7th plus the many Houthi missiles that have been shot out of the sky and this one that has landed and the forest fires, all of that, like some of the March of the Living experience was by design. And the people who think about and design the March of the Living experience decided this year that, taking these young people to the Nova site and to the South to witness what happened there was within the purview. And I think that that's like a really interesting expansion of mission, right? Mission creep. I think that's a very interesting, impactful choice. Nobody planned for the forest fires, right? They should have been planning better to not have forest fires. We know that now. So yes, they were with a group, and yes, they were with people who are thinking about the entire trauma of this experience, and social workers, which is not to say that it like erases it, but they're probably talking about it. They're probably managing it. And, like we go through life trying to prevent trauma, but we also have to have the coping mechanisms and develop the coping mechanisms in ourselves and in our children and our friends and our communities to support people through their trauma as best we can. So I'm not minimizing it, but all of these people were there and had this shared experience with professionals, and time will tell.
Okay, let's move on to our main topic. There were two pieces that were recently published, one about the Chabad Loft, which is the actual title, in Greenwich Village, and they have a new sushi restaurant there that they've started that is doing kosher omakase dinners. I don't know if you know what an omakase dinner is, anybody listening there, but it basically means that you don't get a menu, you just sit down and you eat whatever the chef has decided is best for the night. And these are typically very, very expensive, very high-end sushi restaurants that are doing that, and they've decided to go and start that as well. There's another piece in Hey Alma where they interviewed Tova Sterling, and the program that she has been running called Sinners Shabbat. She says that she didn't feel comfortable in the usual young professional events, so she started making ones for Jews that were more on the fringes of the community. It feels like these are part of a larger trend in Judaism and actually religion in general about trying to make traditions more accessible by rebranding them, making them fit more modern sensibilities. I'm curious if you think that this is a good thing. What do you think? How do we feel about marketing and rebranding faith in general?
Okay, so a lot of people like to knock on Chabad. So I just want to acknowledge that people knock on Chabad, but also they do a tremendous amount of good. And as a grad student, I had this, fabulous Shabbat dinner on the canals in Venice at the Chabad house with like hundreds of my co-religionists. And they just like offer that everywhere. And I want to acknowledge that that's pretty amazing. And at the same time, I sort of always wonder about that undercurrent of outreach. And like, if somebody's trying to save my soul by selling me their particular brand of Judaism, which really makes me chafe, which isn't Chabad specific. And as Avi reminded me, maybe is the context in which I met him many years ago in NCSY. It's sort of like our sort of evangelism, Jews trying to save other Jews' souls by bringing them in. And so there's something that gives me the icks about that. On the other hand, if we believe that like, there's something beautiful and amazing about living a rich Jewish life, then of course, why don't we want to share that? Of course we want to share that. And I think that the Hey Alma piece and the Fins and Scales piece were sort of pulling in different directions, because like Chabad was trying to pull people, I think, into tradition and help them find an entry in, like, is it a disingenuous way? Like, no, my Jewish life isn't really all fancy sushi dinners. And the Hey Alma piece, I think, was using tradition, but on the fringes, and raised questions for me about like the boundaries of inclusion and like, you know, what it costs to be inclusive in sort of different ranges of inclusion. That was my initial read on those two pieces.
I kind of applaud them. I think this is great. I have long been championing the idea that Judaism doesn't sell itself to a younger generation, at least in the world that I live in a non-Orthodox world, a more secular world where people, I think their Jewish identity is often very cultural. It's often very personal, family, private. They'll go to synagogue when they're invited for, a friend's kid's bar mitzvah. They'll go to a Jewish wedding if it's their friend's wedding, but they're not seeking out these kinds of things. And I applaud Chabad. I applaud Tova Sterling. I was saying for a long time when I worked in the synagogue world, if we believe in our product, we have to find creative ways to get people in the door to experience our product, because us standing and saying, look at the way that we do shacharit is not grabbing them. So I applaud anyone who's creatively trying to get people in the door and then hoping their product will take it from there.
You're making a very interesting distinction, though, between getting people in the door to shul and what I'm seeing the difference here, even with the Chabad event, which is that these are not Jewish events. These are events for Jews. And a lot of Jews think to themselves that that's what they have to do to be Jewish, is just go to events for Jews and not think to themselves that there's actually Judaism that you have to do. And if you're not really a young Jewish professional that wants to go to these like high-end fancy cocktail nights to meet other young Jewish professionals, instead you'd rather go to a burlesque kiddush, right? It's not really a Jewish event. It's a burlesque event, and you happen to be there with a lot of other Jews who are going to laugh and really appreciate that there's kiddush happening as part of this burlesque performance.
But wait, why is the Young Jewish Professionals event Jewish then?
Oh, it's not.
Okay, just clarifying.
What's the line though? Like why can't a bunch of Jewish people doing something together be a Jewish event? It could be. Like, what defines that? We have this argument all the time. Like in Winnipeg, as an example, the Rady Center has had for 50 years an annual sports dinner with a big sports guest that helps raise money and do things like that. And there was a debate many years ago, should this dinner be kosher? You know, the kashrut issue was raging the cost, and people were making the argument, it's not a Jewish dinner. It's a dinner with a bunch of Jews who are into sports. And if we want to, considering community is such a huge part of who we are, having Jewish people around other Jewish people, is it the doing Jewish things? Is it doing only Jewish things? Is it doing one Jewish thing for every 5 non-Jewish? I don't know.
I don't have the ratio, but I think it's both. I really think that we should be doing more things with other Jews. It's always good to be part of a community, even if it's not the exclusive community that you have. But there should also be a pathway from that to doing actually Jewish things, like ritual moments, text-based learning moments, anything that actually does something that 100 years ago would have been perceived as like, oh, a Jewish ritual, a Jewish event, a Jewish something. Chabad actually is very good at creating that pipeline, right? They know that if they do these omakase dinners, they might get them to like put on tefillin or to come to a Shabbat dinner or to like and eventually move on.
I mean, they said, right, the omakase dinner is lead generation. It's reaching out to those people, getting them on a mailing list, letting them know about more events.
It's the weekend in the like timeshare in the hotel so that you can listen to the timeshare presentation for an hour.
Yes. It's how do we bring these people into community and how do we build a connection with them style. And like Chabad is, I have a friend who says it's like the most successful franchise on the planet, right? That like business schools should be studying Chabad because like there is nothing that's more successful.
I would fight you on that one because we had on the Bonjour Chai, we had Samuel Heilman on a long time ago. And he's like, you might want to rethink that because at the end of the day, how many people are Chabad? They're not really, their conversion rate is very low, so to speak. In terms
but I think they're okay with that. It depends on like what they would articulate the mission as. But if the mission is connecting Jews and giving them warm, fuzzy feelings about Judaism and then hoping that they will come back, I think that that's very successful. The Sinner's Shabbat, I think that the goal is different.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
And like, I don't feel like it's, for me to say that, it's good or it's bad. It's another effort at community building. And like Judaism provides the symbols and the excuse. But, maybe I'll reframe that when we get to the Torah section later.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
You mentioned NCSY a while ago, and I was an advisor for many, many years in NCSY. And I remember the director of NCSY at the time, we were sitting in the office one day and he was like, why are we always trying so hard to target the cool kids? He's like, don't the nerdy kids need Judaism too? And he's like, and they'll come to anything. He's like, why are we wasting all of this energy and effort to be like, we're going to do the coolest thing you can possibly do to show you that Judaism is cool, right? Is just do the Judaism stuff and say that it's for teens. And a lot of teens that are not super cool are just going to show up because they're going to want to be part of a program anyways. And
it's true.
And I was like,
so true.
It really got me thinking. And I don't know if you've had the same experience where so much of the outreach world is really focused on this, like, we got to show you how cool Judaism can be or how relevant or how like it's so meant for this generation, and you can do this and be Jewish, or you can go skiing and still be religious. You can do all these things. And I don't know, that's something that really does rub me the wrong way, that says that like it's bad marketing.
But you always want what you can't have, right? And I always had that joke, like, too cool for shul. And so like, you feel like at any moment you'll have a program, you invite the nerdy kids, as you say, Avi, and they'll come. So it's the kids who don't want to come that you're like, we got to get those kids. We got to get those kids.
Are you saying that I wasn't one of the cool kids?
Oh,
I'm saying I wasn't one of the cool
kids. You know how much
kids?
energy that they had to expend to make sure that somebody of the caliber of Yedida Eisenstat, right? They could have gotten 40 nerdy kids, I'm sure, for like one Yedida.
So so one of the questions that the Hey Alma piece raised for me, so she says, the quote is, and I think this is a great quote, is the price we pay to be inclusive is to be on the fringe. So with that recognition, right? So my question is about like authenticity and like, how cool is it?
That's actually interesting because they are not on the fringe. They are the center of their world, and they made something that makes perfect sense for them. And they're leading their authentic Jewish self in that way, right? They're saying to themselves, this is who I am as a person. Mine. Yeah, exactly. That puts them on the fringe of the mainstream society, but they're at least being real about what they like and saying, this is who I am. I actually suspect that the vast majority of people that do outreach, Kiruv, NCSY, any sort of like, whether it's for youth or for adults, it says more about them, what they're doing in outreach, than it says about the people that they're reaching, and the marketing, the coolness, the cool, all this. I think that for a lot of these people, they also need to feel that faith is cool and interesting and relevant in order for it to stay connected to it themselves, right? And they're speaking more to themselves and they're speaking to the people that they're trying to reach out to.
And it's community building, right? I think there's like some slight nuance between Kiruv and like trying to bring people closer to the tradition, however construed, and building community. Fun fact, back in 2014, I wrote an column op-ed-y thing for the Canadian Jewish News. And the question that they posed to me was how to save conservative Judaism. I was graduating from graduate school at JTS that year and coming back to Toronto. And what I wrote was shuls need to be community centers. Synagogues need to be places where your kids are comfortable. It's a space that they've been in since they were a child, that they're comfortable running around and being a kid, and they know where all the good hiding places are, that it's a place that they're just like familiar and comfortable, not a place that they go once a year and they don't know where the bathrooms are.
To get back to our original conversation, I think synagogues need to be trying at least these two articles they're trying something new. They're refusing to say that Judaism is some kind of static thing, right? Like I get the argument, we used to have this meeting, all these kind of interfaith leaders. We'd get together once a month and talk about our issues and realize that everyone had the same issues, right? Regardless of what religion they were in. It was getting attendance at public worship is a huge difficulty in all of these branches of Christianity for us in synagogue. And one of the guys was saying, well, we moved our big service to Sunday night. We moved our service to Monday night. And I was like, we can't really do that. Like, we can't move Shabbat to Sunday afternoon Sunday evening because it's more convenient. It doesn't work like that.
The most successful marketing, quote unquote, things that I've seen happen within Jewish communal life has been taking the things that we do, like you said, shul or any other ritual stuff, learning, and made it into something actually relevant or different, right? I had a program where I was doing something. I did this thing in Montreal called the Jewish Living Lab for a while, where I was trying to experiment in these types of ways. But I would okay, how am I going to get Chavruta learning to be interesting? I'm going to turn it into an art jam, where an artist is going to give us like a couple of prompts and you're going to learn a text together with a Chavruta, and then you're going to do a co-created art piece.
I love this. I used to do this thing at the Sharon Zedek when I worked there, and I still kind of do it when I read Torah now, not as often. I used to call it Torah play-by-play, right? Mm-hmm. Where in between the aliyot, I noticed that during my Torah reading, I worked so hard to prepare the Torah reading, and everyone was like zoning out and not even reading the books, and I could hear whispers. I was like, how do I get their attention? Clearly the Torah isn't enough to get their attention. So I would, in between the aliyot, I'd be like, that line that we say every day in Shacharit, it's in the Torah and it's in the next reading. Go look for it. These are what we have to do. Judaism is beautiful because it's super old, but it's also very inaccessible in places because it's super old. And you have to find ways to merge those two things, the beauty of being old, but some kind of flexibility. Isn't that the whole idea of naming our podcast Not in Heaven? Is that right here on the ground, we're handling something that we want to make more relevant?
Absolutely.
No?
Yedida, where do you think the line should get drawn in okay, at this point, this is no longer rebranding or marketing a Jewish event or an event for Jews or whatever it is. This is beyond the pale.
No comment.
No comment?
No. I think that I was really struggling with that while I was prepping for this episode. It gets to the question of what is Judaism, right? Are we an ethnicity? Are we a religion? Are we a community? And depending on what your answer, are we a value system? Depending on your answer to that question, your lines are very different. Okay, so I know a lot of Jewish history and I'm about to enter the rabbi club, but that doesn't make me more Jewish than somebody else who has a mother, a parent who's Jewish. I just think these are really complicated questions, and who gets to decide them is really complicated. And I want to acknowledge that. And so I don't think Sinner's Shabbat is for me, but I also want to acknowledge that I don't, who cares what I have to say about that?
My friend lived in New York for a little while just when the pandemic was hitting, and he spent the Yontif, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur of 2019 there. And in New York, he was living in Toronto, but even compared to there, and certainly compared to Winnipeg, the options, the plethora of options when it comes to what to do to be Jewish was kind of very tantalizing. And they ended up at this jazz Rosh Hashanah. Now, what he didn't know was that my ordaining rabbi, Stephen Blaine, that's his service down at the bitter end in New York, but he's doing jazz Rosh Hashanah with a jazz trio, a full, mostly musical experience. But my buddy Lewis, my best friend Lewis, is telling me how cool this is. And I'm thinking this is exactly what my teacher was going for. Someone heard jazz Judaism, was like, hey, that's kind of something that I know, sort of, but a new twist on it, and went to go check it out. Now I think there's a lot of Jewish content there. It's a Rosh Hashanah service after all. I remember a program I was involved in once. They were calling it Fire and Ice, where we did Havdalah on a Saturday night, and then we all went curling. It was learn to curl. No one had ever gone curling, right? They called it Fire and Ice.
So Canadian.
This is the Canadian Jewish news. I mean, come on, right? I feel like this is a safe place to talk about curling. And I remember thinking 5 minutes of Judaism, and then the rest of the night was really just a bunch of Jewish people hanging around and curling. But I bet you if you asked all of those people, they would have told you it was a Jewish event. Now, is that because we did the Havdalah piece at the beginning? Is that the lasting thing? Do any of those people go home and do Havdalah the next week? My guess would be no. But is that enough?
Any youth group event is,
totally.
Havdalah, pizza, bowling, curling, hockey, skating, So
I think we all agree these are good things, right?
Yeah. I think where I draw the line is not, any specific event. I'm not pointing fingers at any event, mentioned or not. But I have a hard time when the marketing factor, the rebrand, the layer that you're adding beyond the Judaism doesn't actually serve any greater purpose other than just to say, hey, we're cool.
To go like a little religion-y professor here, we're like define, right? Like we have like the norm, sort of like the mainstream religion that we're thinking about of like mainstream, like North American denominational Judaism, which I think is breaking down and is, less and less descriptive of North American Jewry. And I think Sinners Shabbat and Chabad are manifestations of that. But I just want to name that like the thing that isn't mainstream, right? We're still defining it or observing it from the main, like we are observing it from a more mainstream perspective. And the thing itself also, right, calling itself Sinners Shabbat is putting it outside the mainstream. So there's still this like dialogue, the jargony word would be dialectic, this dance that's going on between the mainstream thing and the off the beaten path thing. And they're sort of maneuvering in relation to each other.
I'm not here saying that the only real Shabbat is boring Shabbat, right? In shul, doing Friday night dinner with your parents and Bubby and Zadie and all of that, and the challah and all of that. No, there is a myriad ways to interpret what that Shabbat is. What I'm saying is taking something and adding a layer to the Shabbat is saying taking anything that has a historical connection to Shabbat in some real authentic, and by authentic in this case, all I'm meaning is accepted historical practice, right? Whether it's Shabbat, whether it's, I don't want to, I'm going to cut out the Karaites here, right? That'll be my way of like saying, right, they don't count, right? But like taking anything that's part of that and then adding a modern layer to it or adding another layer to it to create something that is better than the sum of its parts, right? If you are saying you're going to take like, let's say a nature Shabbat, right? And it's taking all the elements of Shabbat, bringing them into nature, infusing them with ideas of nature, in nature, with all of that that's going on, that's a wonderful thing. I'm not here to say that it has to be in shul and you have to just call it nature Shabbat. And the only thing that's different is you're serving like soy milk. Right. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm trying to get at is there's a lot of stuff that's like that. But then there are people that are going to go and say, well, come to our Shabbat. We're doing this really cool thing. But in reality, they're not doing anything different. That this cool thing is being added to. It's just there to like draw people in. And in reality, it's like it's shallow.
I said early on that like Chabad is trying to sell something that they really believe in and is beautiful. And, they want more people to partake of this wonderful, rich tradition. Given that, why are we turning to sushi? Yeah. Right? I think that's what you're saying.
Something like that.
Like there's got to be something that's like more indigenous to the tradition and historical and part of our historic practice. And it doesn't, have to be, jellied calf's foot, but it can also be something delicious and culinary or other, but it doesn't have to be sushi.
You gave me this idea for pickleball Shabbat. I want to do pickleball Shabbat.
How are you going to do pickleball Shabbat? Let's spin this out. How are you going to turn it into like an element?
Well, yeah, obviously pickleball. There's so much. Didn't Seth Rogen make a movie about just being in a brine with pickles? Like
yes, of course.
It's the most Jewish vegetable by far.
Yeah, the pickle aspect is there, but I'm saying, are you going to turn the bima into a pickleball court?
Probably that wouldn't go over very well, but at least we're on to something. I've piqued your curiosity.
Yeah, I want to see you spin it out and figure it out.
I agree with you, though, of course. And this feels like what I think a lot of us probably do in our practice, what a lot of rabbis are faced with doing, or other kind of Jewish leaders, is finding a way to infuse this Jewish content. Because I'm with you. There has to be a There has to be a connection. Like there has to be something that makes it feel, again, like we're doing in 2025 what our ancestors did on their terms, but it's still the same spirit. You know me, I'm all about the spirit of the law kind of guy. And I think that if you can capture the spirit of Shabbat, whatever that may be, however you kind of define it, then I'm with you, Avi. It doesn't have to be in shul at all. But as for pickleball Shabbat, I guess the goal there is you have to use real pickles.
Oh, perhaps. The one I will raise you, I will see your pickleball Shabbat and I will raise you curling. Whereas in curling, the big tournaments are called bonspiels, and the president of the curling club here in Chicago is Jewish, and we've been like batting around this idea of not having a bonspiel, but having a Purim spiel, and that all the ends would be related to the Megillah in some way, and like
10 chapters, 10 ends. That's brilliant.
8 ends actually in curling, but well, who's
counting? Whoa! Where?
We play 8 ends.
Could you imagine stopping the Megillah after chapter 8? There's 10 ends in Canada.
I know. But I guess we're rookies maybe or something.
I love your idea. I actually thought it was Bonspiel and a Jewish event for the longest time. I had to be corrected on that. It was quite embarrassing.
Okay. So for this week's question, I'd like to turn to the beginning of Kedoshim, right in the middle of the double portion this week. And the main phrase in that first aliyah, which is giving the name to the entire parsha, is Kedoshim tihiyu ki kadosh ani, right? You should be holy because I am holy. And this is God speaking to the people of Israel. Now, if you look at the commentaries, a good number of the ones that I went through, both medieval, modern, say either one of two things. They either say that holiness is invoked here because the Israelites are about to learn many halachot, right? And those laws are the path to holiness. Or they say the exact opposite. Don't think that just because you do the laws, you're holy. Holiness comes because of imitatio Dei, right? Aspiring to be like God, right? That's why we tell you to be holy, because it's not just about the laws. It's about everything else that infuses your life with that. I personally think that it's a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B, right? Laws are a great path to holiness. They are by far not the only thing that you need to do to aspire to be kadosh. So my question to you guys is there a halacha that you actually feel channels holiness for you personally? Or if not, is there one that absolutely doesn't?
I never thought it maybe necessarily in the form of your question, Avi, but it's from this parsha, and it's one of the mitzvot that I'm always drawn to, and so I think I'm going to make it work for your idea. The line about do not put a stumbling block in front of a blind person is in Kedoshim. Mm-hmm. I remember reading it on Yom Kippur in the afternoon before, and I've always loved that idea. I've always tried to teach that idea to young bar mitzvah students because it's a metaphor, and they don't always kind of think and get that whole thing when it's not literal. But whenever I find in my life that I have the opportunity to live out what I believe, at least, to be the essence of that idea, do not put a stumbling block in front of a blind person, or even better than that, to be able to remove stumbling blocks, then I feel, that's when I feel it. I feel it there. I don't feel it I may be in a more traditional or expected kind of place, but that line in Kedoshim has always grabbed me, and I think maybe that is why.
Yedida.
One of the explanations for why the Torah goes into so much detail about bodily fluids and discharges is that there needs to be a lot of distance between God and the holy and the holiest part of the temple, and like the bodily fluids that are manifestations of our humanness and our human body, because God is so totally other and without a body. And so this is not an answer to like Avi's question of what makes me feel holiest, but I think that like one meaningful way of understanding all of those laws around family purity that some people find more meaningful than others is to sort of think about it as legislation and practices, both to try to infuse holiness into a couple's physical relationship, and also a way of like sort of channeling your mortality and humanity and thinking about that as sort of the thing that makes us totally different from God.
I'm going to go totally out of left field. and I'm going to say shotness, which is in this week's Torah portion also. And I'm getting faces. And I'm like, what? I buy a lot of suits. I wear a lot of suits. I wear a lot of clothes. And every time I get a suit checked, you check it to make sure that there's no wool and linen together in the suit. And I used to just like, that's what you got to do. It's a mitzvah and that's it. And then I had a graduate professor who was like, this is taking the plant world and the animal world and intermingling them. And God is basically saying it's okay for them to really be around, but you always have to remember that there are separations between the plant world and the animal world, and you do that by having that in your dress. And so now every time I put on a suit and it doesn't have shotness, I think about that moment and I say, I'm wearing, the wool of a sheep, but there is no plant life in it because the plant life is there and the animal life is there and they don't meet.
I've never heard that before. Thank you.
All right.
That's very cool. We started with fashion and we go out with fashion.
Exactly.
This makes perfect sense.
Thank you for listening to Not in Heaven. Our producer and editor is Zachary Kauffman. Michael Fraiman is the executive producer. To catch every episode, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to support our show, consider making a donation to the CJN at thecjn.ca/donate.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.